My mom sneered. "You're just a guest in this house, don't act like you." I'm Scarlett, 29 years old, and I've always tried to please my mother. After college, I moved back home to help my financially struggling parents. For 6 months, I paid their bills only to hear my mother sneer, "You're just a guest in this house." That night, she threw my suitcase down the stairs and told me to go stay somewhere you're wanted. So I did. I quietly packed up and left. A month later, when my dad texted about the power being shut off, I felt a strange satisfaction. If you've ever had to stand up to toxic family, let me know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe to join others who've learned that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. My childhood with my mother Janet was like walking on eggshells. One moment, she'd shower me with affection, telling me how special I was, and the next, she'd tear me apart with criticism about everything from my appearance to my hobbies. Nothing was ever quite good enough for her. My father Robert was physically present, but emotionally absent. Whenever conflict arose, he'd disappear to his workshop in the garage, leaving me alone to deal with my mother's unpredictable moods. As the years passed, I naturally fell into the role of family peacekeeper. I became the good daughter who never caused trouble. I learned to anticipate my mother's needs before she expressed them, to laugh at her jokes, even when they were at my expense, and to hide my own feelings to keep the peace. I watched my words carefully, knowing that the wrong phrase could trigger hours of silent treatment or explosive arguments. Despite the emotional turbulence at home, I found refuge in school. I fell in love with architecture at 14 when our class visited a newly constructed museum downtown. The way the building seemed to communicate through its design fascinated me. I started sketching buildings, studying famous architects, and dreaming of creating spaces that would make people feel something. My teachers noticed my passion and encouraged me to pursue it. Throughout high school, I worked tirelessly toward earning a scholarship. I stayed up late finishing design projects, maintained perfect grades, and volunteered with Habitat for Humanity to gain practical building experience, all while continuing to manage the delicate emotional ecosystem at home. When I finally received the letter announcing a substantial scholarship to the architectural program at a university 300 miles away, I cried with relief. It wasn't just an academic achievement, it was my ticket to freedom. Those 4 years at university were transformative. For the first time in my life, I experienced what it felt like to exist without walking on eggshells. I made genuine friends who appreciated me for who I was, not what I could do for them. My roommate Ashley became the sister I never had, accepting me completely and encouraging me to discover my own voice. I joined the Student Architecture Association, presented at conferences, and even won a design competition in my junior year. I spoke to my parents weekly, but the distance allowed me to establish boundaries I'd never had before. I could hang up when conversations became toxic. I could surround myself with supportive people who didn't criticize my every move. I began to understand that the dynamics in my childhood home weren't normal or healthy. In my final semester, everything was falling into place. I had a promising job offer from a prestigious firm in Seattle, apartment hunting plans with Ashley, and a future that felt bright with possibility. Then came the call that changed everything. "Scarlett," my father's voice sounded strained over the phone. "I need to talk to you about something important." He explained that he had lost his job of 20 years due to company downsizing. On top of that, my mother had developed complications from a routine procedure, resulting in significant medical bills. They were behind on their mortgage payments and at risk of losing the house where I'd grown up. "We've never asked you for anything," he said, his voice breaking, "but we really need your help right now." The timing couldn't have been worse. I was 3 weeks from graduation, ready to start my adult life. But the weight of family obligation and genuine concern for my parents overwhelmed my reservations. After sleepless nights and long conversations with Ashley, I made the difficult decision to turn down the Seattle position and accept a lower-paying job at a small firm in my hometown. It would be temporary, I told myself, just until they got back on their feet. When I arrived home after graduation, my parents welcomed me with what seemed like genuine warmth. My mother had prepared my favorite meal, and my father had cleared space in the garage for my belongings. For those first few weeks, I allowed myself to believe that perhaps our relationship had evolved during my time away, that perhaps we could establish a healthier dynamic as adults. I couldn't have been more wrong. The financial arrangement I made with my parents seemed reasonable at first. I would take the local job at Williams and Associates architectural firm, which paid significantly less than my Seattle offer, but would allow me to help my family while gaining professional experience. I agreed to contribute to household expenses while saving for my eventual move. Just until we get back on our feet, my father had promised, relief evident in his eyes. Initially, I paid for groceries and my personal expenses. But within weeks, my contributions expanded. First came the utility bills, electricity, water, internet. My mother presented them to me one evening, explaining that they were still catching up on medical payments. "We would never ask if we weren't desperate," she said with a sigh that made me feel guilty for my momentary hesitation. By month 3, I was covering the utilities, groceries, and contributing $500 toward their mortgage payment. My salary, already modest for an entry-level architect, was being stretched to its limits. Meanwhile, I had to put my own savings goals on indefinite hold. My living space in the house reflected my ambiguous status. I was given my old childhood bedroom, which still contained my twin bed with the floral comforter I'd had since high school, the desk where I'd studied for SATs, and posters I'd outgrown years ago. When I attempted to store some of these items in the attic to make room for my adult possessions, my mother became oddly defensive. "This is still my house," she reminded me. "You can't just start rearranging things." So I adapted as best I could, storing most of my belongings in plastic containers stacked against the wall, using my childhood desk to review architectural plans, and sleeping on a bed too small for my adult frame. As weeks turned into months, my mother began implementing strange rules that hadn't existed during my childhood. She created kitchen hours, outside of which I wasn't supposed to cook or eat in shared spaces. She complained about my morning routine disturbing her sleep, though my room was on the opposite end of the house from theirs. She criticized the smell of my professional clothing products, claiming they gave her headaches. "When you have your own house, you can do whatever you want," became her frequent refrain. "But while you're here, you need to respect our space." The contradiction wasn't lost on me. I was financially supporting the household while being treated as an unwelcome intruder. My father witnessed these interactions but remained largely silent, occasionally offering a weak, "Your mother just likes things a certain way," when we were alone. Small incidents began accumulating. I returned home one day to find my mail had been opened. "I thought it might be important," my mother explained without apology. Another time, she tidied up my room while I was at work, rearranging my professional documents and misplacing an important client file. "You should be grateful I'm trying to help keep things organized," she said when I expressed frustration. My clothing began disappearing from the laundry, only to reappear days later in random locations. The bathroom products I kept in the shared hall bathroom were repeatedly moved to my room because they cluttered the counter. The Wi-Fi would mysteriously reset whenever I was in the middle of important work calls. Each incident in isolation seemed petty, not worth confronting. Together, they formed a pattern of territorial behavior that made me feel increasingly unwelcome in what had once been my home. Yet financially, my parents seemed to need me more than ever, always with a new bill or expense that required my contribution. I began to feel like an ATM with legs, valued for financial support, but resented for my physical presence. The arrangement that was supposed to be temporary began to feel like a trap with no clear exit. The tensions with my mother escalated over the following months, transforming from subtle territorial behaviors to outright hostility. The breaking point began on my 30th birthday. I had planned a small dinner with 2 friends from work, having cleared it with my parents a week in advance. I even offered to cook the meal myself to avoid inconveniencing them. On the day of my birthday, I returned from work early to prepare dinner. I found my mother in the kitchen, aggressively cleaning and rearranging everything. "I can't believe the mess in here," she complained when I walked in. "And now I have to get it presentable for your friends." "I was going to clean up," I explained, setting down my grocery bags. "And you don't need to do anything special. These are just casual friends." She slammed a cabinet door. "Well, I can't have people thinking we live like slobs. Not everyone has fancy architecture degrees and can ignore basic housekeeping." The passive-aggressive comment stung, but I tried to maintain peace on my birthday. "Mom, why don't you let me handle this? You don't need to worry about my friends." "This is still my kitchen," she snapped. I decide how things work in here. By the time my friends arrived, the atmosphere was so tense they noticed immediately. Throughout dinner, my mother interrupted conversations, criticized my cooking, and made uncomfortable comments about my childhood embarrassments. My friends left early, shooting me sympathetic glances on their way out. Later that week, I came home to find my bookshelf of architecture references and professional journals completely reorganized. My carefully ordered system was destroyed with books stacked by size rather than subject. When I confronted my mother, she acted surprised at my reaction. "I was just trying to make it look nicer," she said. "Those books were an eyesore the way you had them." "They were organized by subject for my work," I explained, trying to keep my voice level. "I need to be able to find things quickly." "Well, excuse me for trying to help," she replied with a dramatic sigh. "I forgot how perfect you always need everything to be." These incidents multiplied as summer turned to fall. I began noticing discrepancies in the financial situation my parents had described. While claiming they couldn't contribute to groceries or utilities, my mother appeared with a new designer handbag. When I complimented it, she quickly changed the subject. One Saturday, while my parents were at a neighbor's barbecue, I searched for some tax documents my father had asked me to sign. In their bedroom closet, I discovered shopping bags containing unworn clothing with price tags still attached, high-end electronics, still in boxes, and receipts for restaurant meals that contradicted their claims of financial austerity. My suspicions grew when I overheard a phone conversation between my mother and her sister. Not intentionally eavesdropping, I was working in the garden when their voices carried through the open window. "Well, of course it's nice having her contribute," my mother was saying. "Robert and I have been wanting to boost our retirement accounts for years. This is finally giving us the chance to put some money aside." My heart sank as I realized the extent of the deception. The financial emergency that had derailed my career plans was largely fabricated. I was being used as a convenient source of income while being treated with increasing resentment. When I tried to discuss the situation with my father, catching him alone in his workshop, he brushed off my concerns. "Your mother just likes things a certain way," he repeated his usual excuse. "And we really do appreciate your help. Things have been tight." "Are they actually tight, Dad?" I asked directly. "Because I'm seeing a lot of new purchases around here." He avoided my eyes, focusing on the birdhouse he was building. "We've had to make some necessary expenditures. Don't worry about it." "I am worried about it," I pressed. "I gave up a job opportunity to help you both, and now I'm paying most of the household expenses while being treated like an unwanted house guest." "You're exaggerating," he said, still not looking at me. "Your mother is just set in her ways. It'll get better." But it didn't get better. The following week, I discovered my mother had been through my personal journal. I kept it in my laptop bag, which I normally took to work, but had accidentally left at home one day. When I returned, subtle things were different. The bookmark moved pages slightly creased. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. "I have a right to know what's going on under my own roof," she said defiantly, "especially when you're writing things about me." That night, I began researching apartments in the area. I started quietly setting aside a portion of each paycheck, creating a secret emergency fund. I contacted former classmates to see if anyone needed a temporary roommate. While continuing to pay the household bills, I prepared for an exit that was becoming increasingly necessary for my mental health. What I didn't realize was how quickly things would come to a head. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I went to work, presented design concepts to clients, and stayed late to finish some renderings. It was nearly 7 when I finally headed home, stopping to pick up takeout since I was too tired to cook. The house was unusually quiet when I arrived, though both my parents' cars were in the driveway. I headed upstairs to change clothes before dinner, but stopped short in the doorway of my room. Everything had been moved. My bed was stripped to the mattress, my clothes were piled on chairs, and my books and personal items had been rearranged. The room smelled strongly of cleaning chemicals that made my eyes water. "Mom," I called out, setting down my food and bag. "What happened to my room?" I found her in the living room flipping through a magazine with forced casualness. "I deep cleaned it," she said without looking up. "It was getting dusty, and I know how busy you are." "You moved all my things," I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. I can't find anything now. I did you a favor, she replied. Most people would say thank you. As I looked around the living room, I noticed something else. The family photos that had included me. My graduation picture, childhood vacation snapshots, even my professional headshot had been removed from the walls. Only photos of my parents remained. Where are the family pictures? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach. My mother finally looked up from her magazine. I'm redecorating. Those old frames were outdated. That's when my father emerged from the kitchen looking uncomfortable as he always did during confrontations. Your mother thought it was time for a change, he offered weakly. The house needed freshening up. It's not just the pictures, I said, feeling a strange calm despite the anger bubbling inside me. It's my room, my belongings, the constant rearranging of my things without permission. It feels intentional, like you're trying to erase me from this house. My mother slapped her magazine down on the coffee table. That's ridiculous. You're being oversensitive as usual. Am I? I asked. Because it seems like you're doing everything possible to make me feel unwelcome even while I'm paying most of the bills around here. And there it is. My mother stood up, her face flushing. You never let us forget your financial contribution. You think that gives you the right to take over our house to dictate how we live. Take over? I was genuinely confused. Mom, I've been tiptoeing around here for months following your arbitrary rules, trying not to disturb anything. How exactly am I taking over? You bring your fancy architect friends over, you rearrange the kitchen cabinets, you leave your work stuff all over the dining table. I cleared the dining table every single time, I interrupted. And I asked permission before having friends over, which has happened exactly twice in 6 months. This is still my house, she shouted, her voice rising. You seem to have forgotten that. You're acting like you own the place. I don't claim to own it, I replied, struggling to remain calm. But I have been contributing significantly to maintaining it. I think that entitles me to basic respect for my belongings and personal space. That's when she said it, the words that would ultimately change everything between us. You're just a guest in this house, she sneered, her face contorted with an emotion I couldn't quite identify. Don't act like you belong here. The room fell silent. Even my father looked shocked. A guest, I repeated slowly. Is that what I am? Because guests don't typically pay mortgage, utilities, and groceries. Guests don't put their career on hold to help financially. What kind of guest does that, Mom? Don't twist my words, she snapped. You know what I mean. Actually, I don't, I said, feeling something breaking loose inside me. Years of accommodating her moods, walking on eggshells, making myself smaller to avoid her wrath. Why don't you explain exactly what you mean? Instead of answering, she stormed out of the living room. I heard her footsteps on the stairs, followed by the sound of drawers being yanked open. My father and I stood in uncomfortable silence until she returned, dragging my suitcase behind her. If you're so unhappy here, if we're such terrible parents for giving you a place to stay, then maybe you should leave. She threw the suitcase down the staircase where it tumbled loudly to the bottom step. Go stay somewhere you're wanted. Go stay with your fancy architecture friends who think you're so special. My father finally intervened, though not in the way I might have hoped. Janet, calm down. There's no need for this scene. Don't tell me to calm down, she shouted. She's been judging us for months, acting superior, making me feel like a stranger in my own home. I looked at my father, searching for any sign that he recognized the irrationality of what was happening. But all I saw was his familiar conflict avoidance, his desperate desire for peace at any cost. Dad, I said quietly, do you also see me as just an unwanted guest here? He looked at the floor, then at my mother, then back at me. Your mother is upset, he said, which wasn't an answer at all. Maybe we all need to cool down and talk tomorrow. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. This dynamic would never change. I would never be seen as an adult deserving of respect in this house. I would always be expected to accommodate, to apologize, to make myself smaller for their comfort. And my father would never stand up for me or for himself. I think Mom's right, I said finally. I should go somewhere I'm wanted. I walked down the stairs, picked up my suitcase, and headed to my room without another word, a plan already forming in my mind. After the explosive confrontation, I returned to my room and closed the door, listening to my parents argue downstairs. Their voices rose and fell, with my mother's dominating as usual. I sat on my bed, my heart racing, but my mind surprisingly clear. This was it. The moment when everything changed. Not with drama or grand declarations, but with quiet, methodical action. I pulled out my phone and texted my college friend Amelia, who lived about 20 miles away in the next town. Had a bad fight with my parents. Any chance I could crash on your couch for a few days while I figure things out? Her response came almost immediately. My door is always open for you. Do you need me to come get you? No, I typed back. I'll drive over later tonight. Thank you. With that safety net secured, I began packing systematically. I focused on essentials: first work clothes, personal documents, laptop, and architecture portfolios. I gathered my professional licenses and certificates, financial paperwork, and the external hard drive containing all my design work. Next came toiletries, medications, and enough clothing to get me through a week. I moved quietly and efficiently, packing items in my suitcase and several duffel bags I'd kept from college. As I worked, I could hear my parents settling into their evening routine, my father turning on the TV in the living room, my mother loading the dishwasher with excessive clanging of plates. They assumed I was sulking, as I'd done after previous arguments. They had no idea I was executing an escape plan. While packing, I used my phone to methodically remove myself from the household utilities. I logged into the electricity account I'd been paying for months and requested service termination effective immediately. I did the same with the water, internet, and gas bills. Each confirmation email gave me a strange sense of relief. I opened my banking app and documented all the payments I'd made toward household expenses over the past 6 months, nearly $20,000 in total. I took screenshots and emailed them to myself as evidence. Not that I expected to need it, but the paper trail felt important somehow. At my desk, I wrote a letter explaining my departure. No emotional accusations, no dramatic declarations, just a clear statement of facts. I have contributed X amount toward household expenses over the past 6 months, I wrote. As it has been made clear that I am considered a guest rather than a family member in this house, I am removing myself from all financial responsibilities associated with this property. I have terminated the utility services that were in my name. I wish you both well in addressing your financial situation going forward. I signed it simply Scarlett and left it on my stripped bed. Around midnight, when the house was quiet and dark, I made several trips carrying my bags to my car, which I had deliberately parked on the street rather than in the driveway to avoid the sound of the engine too close to the house. I made one final sweep of my room, checking drawers and closet corners for anything important I might have missed. As I prepared to leave, I felt a strange mixture of emotions washing over me. There was grief for the loving family relationship I had always wanted but never truly had. There was fear about the uncertainty ahead. But most surprisingly, there was an overwhelming sense of relief, of finally breaking free from a toxic dynamic that had shaped my entire life. I closed the front door silently behind me, careful not to let it latch too loudly. The night air felt cool against my face as I walked to my car. I placed the last bag in my trunk, got into the driver's seat, and just sat there for a moment looking at the dark house where I'd grown up. "Goodbye," I whispered, then started the engine and drove away. The 20-mile drive to Amelia's apartment was surreal. The roads were nearly empty at that hour, and I felt like I was floating through a strange dreamscape, suspended between my old life and whatever came next. I played no music, just drove in silence, processing the magnitude of what I had just done. Amelia was waiting up for me despite the late hour. When I arrived at her apartment complex, she came down to help carry my bags inside. She asked no questions that night, just made up the couch with clean sheets and blankets, set a glass of water on the coffee table, and gave me a long, tight hug before heading back to her bedroom. I lay awake on her couch until dawn, watching the shadows shift across her living room ceiling. For the first time in months, I could breathe fully. There were no eggshells to walk on, no criticism to anticipate, no tension in the air. Just quiet and the promise of a new beginning. The following week was a blur of activity. I went to work as usual, explaining to my boss that I was in transition between living situations. She was more understanding than I expected, offering me flexibility with my hours as I apartment hunted. I spent evenings searching online listings, viewing properties during lunch breaks, and filling out rental applications. 10 days after leaving my parents' house, I signed a lease on a small but sunny one-bedroom apartment closer to my office. The rent was steep given my salary, but without supporting my parents, I could just manage it. Amelia helped me move in, and together we made a trip to a discount furniture store where I purchased a bed, a simple desk, and a comfortable chair. My new place was sparsely furnished, but entirely mine. On the day I moved in, I went to the bank and officially removed myself from all joint accounts with my parents. I closed the credit card I had allowed them to use as authorized users. I changed my mailing address for all correspondence. I was systematically cutting financial ties one by one. Throughout this time, my parents' messages began trickling in. At first, they were clearly unaware that I had permanently left. My mother sent a terse text asking when I would stop this childish sulking and come home. I didn't respond. Then my father, "Your mother's just upset. Come back and we'll sort this out." Again, I didn't engage. It was only when bills came due that the tone of their messages changed dramatically. The fallout began exactly as I had anticipated. 3 days after I moved into my new apartment, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. "Scarlett, the internet is down," he said, sounding confused rather than angry. "Can you call the company when you get home from work? They're saying the account was closed." I deleted the message without responding. 2 days later, several texts arrived in quick succession. "The water bill is showing past due. Did you forget to pay it this month? Are you getting my messages? We need to talk about these utility issues. Scarlett, this isn't funny. Your mother is very upset." I muted the conversation but didn't block them yet. I wanted to be aware of their reactions without being emotionally affected by each message. I was establishing boundaries for perhaps the first time in my life, and it felt simultaneously terrifying and empowering. A week after my departure, the first truly angry call came. I was arranging my new apartment, hanging simple curtains in the living room when my phone lit up with my mother's name. Her voicemail was venomous. "I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but it stops now. Your father and I have been more than generous letting you live here while you get established. The utilities are your responsibility as we agreed. Fix this immediately or don't bother coming back at all." The irony of her final statement wasn't lost on me. She was threatening me with exactly what I had already chosen for myself. My father's approach was different, less confrontational, more manipulative. "Honey, I know you and your mother had a disagreement, but this isn't the way to handle it. We're family. Families work through problems together. Please call me back so we can discuss this rationally." The emotional pull was strong. For a moment, I found myself reaching for the phone, the lifetime habit of peacekeeping hard to break. But then I remembered the suitcase tumbling down the stairs, the sneer on my mother's face as she called me just a guest, and my father's silent complicity. I put the phone down. Exactly 1 month after I had left the message I had been waiting for arrived. It was early morning and I was getting ready for work, enjoying the simple pleasure of preparing breakfast in a kitchen that was entirely mine, when my phone pinged with a text from my father. "The power just got shut off. What is going on with the bill?" I looked at the message for a long moment, considering how or whether to respond. Part of me wanted to ignore it to maintain my silence and distance, but another part wanted them to understand the consequences of how they had treated me. I wanted some small acknowledgement of the hurt they had caused. So I typed a reply, something I had been composing in my head for weeks. "Guess the guests took the electricity with them." Then I put my phone on silent, slipped it into my bag, and left for work. The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone vibrated continuously with calls and texts throughout the morning. My mother alternated between rage, "How dare you do this to your own parents?" and manipulation, "After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us." My father swung between conciliatory, "We can work this out, just talk to us," and guilt-inducing, "Your mother is beside herself, we never thought you would abandon us like this." By lunchtime, they had recruited reinforcements. My aunt called, then my uncle. A family friend texted that she was so worried about everyone. It was a full court press of emotional manipulation, a coordinated attempt to pull me back into the dysfunctional family system. I didn't respond to any of it. Instead, I focused on my work, throwing myself into a challenging design project that required my full attention. My boss noticed my intensity and commented positively on my increased productivity. "You seem more focused lately," she observed during our weekly check-in. "The Miller project designs are some of your best work." I hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I've had some family issues that I've recently addressed. It's freed up a lot of mental space." To my surprise, she nodded knowingly. Family dynamics can be incredibly draining. I had to distance myself from my own father for years before we established a healthy relationship. She gave me a thoughtful look. "If you need to talk or if you need any flexibility while you're sorting things out, just let me know." Her understanding was unexpected and deeply appreciated. It was my first indication that what I had done setting firm boundaries with toxic family members wasn't shameful or selfish as I had been raised to believe, but was recognized by others as necessary and healthy. The following weeks brought continued attempts at contact from my parents, though with decreasing frequency. The tone shifted from outrage to concern. "We're worried about you," to financial desperation. "We don't know how we're going to make the mortgage payment this month." I maintained my silence, focusing instead on building my new life. I found a therapist who specialized in family trauma, Dr. Linden, who helped me understand the dysfunctional patterns I'd been raised with. Our weekly sessions became an anchor as I navigated the complex emotions of establishing independence. "What you're experiencing is common for people breaking free from controlling family dynamics," she explained during one session. "The guilt, the second guessing, it's all part of the process. The fact that they've escalated their attempts to contact you actually confirms you're doing something that threatens the status quo." With Dr. Linden's guidance, I began recognizing how my upbringing had shaped my pleasing tendencies, my difficulty saying no, and my habit of making myself responsible for others' emotions. I started practicing new ways of thinking and behaving that prioritized my own well-being. As I established my independence, I discovered something surprising, without the constant emotional drain of managing my parents' needs and moods. My professional performance improved dramatically. My design work became more innovative and confident. I contributed more in team meetings. I built stronger relationships with colleagues and clients. 3 months after leaving, I was offered a promotion to junior project lead, a role that typically required several more years of experience. My boss cited my exceptional growth and leadership potential as factors in the decision. The salary increase meant I could finally start rebuilding my savings, the first step toward my long-term goal of financial security. Around this same time, I made another discovery. Through a casual conversation with my mother's sister at a family funeral I reluctantly attended, I learned that my parents had substantial savings I'd known nothing about. My aunt, unaware of our estrangement's details, mentioned their recent vacation home purchase in a neighboring state. "They finally bought that lake cottage they've been eyeing for years," she said cheerfully. "Your father's retirement fund really came through for them." The information confirmed what I had suspected: the financial crisis that had prompted my return home had been largely manufactured. While I couldn't know their exact motivations, it appeared they had used me as a convenient source of income to fund their own lifestyle and investments. This knowledge, rather than angering me further, provided a strange sense of closure. It validated my decision to leave and reinforced the reality that I had been manipulated by the people who should have been most trustworthy in my life. 6 months after walking away, I was creating a life that truly belonged to me. My apartment, though small, had become a sanctuary of peace and order. I had made new friends through a local architects association. I had even started dating someone who respected my boundaries and emotional needs. For the first time, I felt like I was flourishing rather than just surviving. And it all began with that painful moment when my mother sneered that I was just a guest in what should have been my home. 6 months turned into 7, then 8. The seasons changed, and with them, my perspective on what had happened continued to evolve. The raw pain had subsided, replaced by a more contemplative understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped me. One Sunday morning in early spring, I was grocery shopping at a store I rarely visited in a neighborhood across town. I was examining avocados when I heard a familiar voice. Scarlett. I turned to find my father standing there, a shopping basket hanging from his arm, looking older and more tired than I remembered. For a moment, neither of us spoke, the ambient noise of the grocery store filling the space between us. Dad, I finally said, neither a question nor an exclamation, just an acknowledgement. You look well. He offered, his eyes taking in my appearance. I had changed in the months since he'd last seen me. New haircut, more confident posture, clothes that expressed my personal style rather than attempting to avoid criticism. Thank you, I replied. I am well. An awkward silence followed. Around us, shoppers moved through the produce section, oblivious to the charged reunion taking place beside the avocado display. Do you have a minute to talk? He asked. Maybe we could grab a coffee? He gestured toward the small cafe at the front of the store. My first instinct was to decline, to protect the peace I'd worked so hard to establish, but I realized I was curious about what he might say, and more importantly, I no longer feared the interaction. I was standing on solid ground now. All right, I agreed, just for a few minutes. We sat at a small table with paper cups of mediocre coffee between us. My father stirred his absently, clearly gathering his thoughts. Your mother went a bit far that night, he finally said, his eyes on his coffee rather than meeting mine. She shouldn't have thrown your suitcase like that. Things got out of hand. It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was the closest thing to an admission of wrongdoing I'd ever heard from either of them. It wasn't just that night, Dad, I replied calmly. It was a pattern of behavior that had been building for months. Years, really. He sighed heavily. We were under a lot of stress. The bills, your mother's health issues. His voice trailed off. Were you really under financial stress? I asked directly. Because Aunt Linda mentioned your new lake cottage. He had the grace to look embarrassed. The timing of that purchase was unfortunate. The timing wasn't the problem, I said. The deception was the problem. I put my career on hold to help you both financially because I believed you were in crisis. We never asked you to give up that job in Seattle, he countered weakly. You didn't have to ask directly. You knew I would come home if you said you needed me. And you did need me, just not for the reasons you claimed. He was silent for the long moment. We're your parents, he finally said, as if that explained everything. Families help each other. Help should go both ways, Dad. And it should be based on honesty, not manipulation. He stirred his coffee again, though it needed no further mixing. Your mother misses you, he said, changing tactics. In her own way. I couldn't help but laugh, a short, disbelieving sound. Has she said that because her texts suggest otherwise? You know how she is. She has trouble expressing vulnerability. I studied my father's face, the familiar lines around his eyes, the gray threading through his hair, the expression of perpetual accommodation that had defined his approach to my mother and to life in general. I felt a wave of compassion for him, even as I recognized I couldn't return to that dynamic. Dad, I'm willing to have a relationship with you, I said carefully. But it has to be different from before. I need boundaries, I need honesty, and I need acknowledgement of how I was treated. What does that mean exactly? He asked, looking uncertain. It means we could meet occasionally for coffee like this. We could talk on the phone sometimes. But I won't be coming back to that house, and I won't be resuming financial support. And your mother, I took a deep breath. I'm not ready to have contact with her yet. Maybe someday if she's willing to acknowledge her behavior and make genuine changes. But that's her choice. He nodded slowly, absorbing this. I understand. Can I call you sometimes? Yes, I said. But I might not always answer. I'm building my own life now, and I need to protect it. We finished our coffee in a silence that wasn't exactly comfortable but wasn't hostile either. As we were about to part ways, he asked about my work, and I shared a little about my promotion and current projects. He seemed genuinely pleased for me. You always were talented, he said with a sad smile. Even as a little girl, you could draw buildings that looked real. It was a small thing, this acknowledgement of who I was beyond my role in the family, but it touched me unexpectedly. We said goodbye in the parking lot with an awkward half hug, and I watched him drive away with mixed emotions. That brief encounter with my father became the template for our new relationship, limited, carefully boundaried, but not entirely severed. We spoke on the phone every few weeks. Sometimes the conversations were strained, particularly when he tried to broker peace with my mother. But other times there were glimpses of what might have been if our family dynamics had been healthier. True to my word, I maintained my distance from my mother. She sent occasional texts that ranged from bitter accusations to performative concerns about my welfare. I read them but rarely responded, each message confirming that the right choice had been maintaining separation. As my first year of independence approached, my career continued to flourish. The promotion had introduced new challenges and opportunities. I was leading a small team on a community center redesign project that incorporated many of my ideas about accessible, human-centered architecture. My boss had become something of a mentor, guiding my professional development with thoughtful feedback and increasing responsibilities. With my improved financial situation, I was able to save enough for a down payment on a small condominium. It wasn't fancy, just one bedroom with an open kitchen and living area, but it was mine in a way that no previous space had ever been. The day I signed the closing papers, I felt a profound sense of achievement. No one could tell me I was just a guest in this space. I decorated my new home thoughtfully, choosing each piece with intention. The furniture was a mix of affordable new items and vintage finds that spoke to me. I displayed my architectural models and favorite design books prominently. I painted one wall a bold teal that my mother would have hated. Every choice was mine alone. My social circle expanded as well. Without the constant drain of managing my parents' emotions, I had energy to nurture friendships. Amelia remained my closest friend, but I also connected with colleagues who shared my professional interests and neighbors in my new building. I even started dating again, taking things slowly with a kind, straightforward landscaper I met through a community garden project. Therapy continued to be a cornerstone of my healing process. Dr. Linden helped me recognize and replace unhealthy thought patterns that had been instilled throughout my childhood. I learned to set boundaries without guilt, to recognize manipulation tactics, and to trust my own perceptions. Family relationships should nurture you, not deplete you, she reminded me during one session. Blood relation doesn't grant anyone the right to mistreat you. 14 months after I had walked away from my parents' house, an unexpected email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read simply, "From your mother." I stared at it for a long time before opening it, preparing myself for another round of accusations or manipulations. What I found instead was surprising. "Scarlett," it began formally, "your father tells me you're doing well with your architecture career. I came across an article about that community center project you're working on. The design looks impressive. I've been doing some reflection over the past year, and I recognize that things between us deteriorated in ways I didn't intend. I miss having you in our lives. If you're ever open to a conversation, I would welcome the opportunity. Janet." It wasn't an apology exactly, and it didn't acknowledge specific behaviors, but it was more self-reflective than anything I'd ever received from her before. I didn't respond immediately, taking time to process my feelings with Dr. Linden and to consider what kind of relationship, if any, I might want with my mother going forward. After careful consideration, I wrote back, "Thank you for your email. I'm glad Dad has been keeping you updated about my work. The community center project has been fulfilling professionally and personally. I appreciate your reaching out and your reflection on our relationship. I'm open to beginning a conversation, but I need to be clear that any future relationship between us would need to be based on mutual respect and healthy boundaries. If you're willing to discuss how we might build that kind of relationship, perhaps we could start with an email exchange. Scarlett." Her response came 2 days later, not defensive as I had feared, but tentative, almost uncertain. We began a careful correspondence, neither overly personal nor entirely superficial. She shared news about her garden and a watercolor class she had started taking. I told her about my condo and the satisfaction of seeing my designs become reality. We avoided the most painful topics, establishing instead a fragile foundation that might eventually support more substantive communication. Whether this cautious reconnection would develop into something meaningful remained to be seen. But the important thing was that I was engaging from a position of strength and self-knowledge, not from obligation or fear. The journey from that painful night when my suitcase tumbled down the stairs to this point of tentative new beginnings had transformed me in ways I couldn't have imagined. I had discovered my own resilience. I had learned that family is defined not by blood or obligation, but by love, respect, and mutual care. I had built a life that reflected my values rather than my fears. Most importantly, I had come to understand that walking away from toxicity isn't selfish or weak. It's often the bravest, most self-honoring choice we can make. I no longer felt like a guest in my own life. I belonged completely to myself, and that was the most profound homecoming of all. Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic relationship to preserve your well-being? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. Remember that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's essential for your mental and emotional health. If my journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe to hear more stories about finding strength in difficult situations. And share this video with someone who might need to hear that sometimes walking away is the strongest move you can make. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, you deserve to be somewhere you're truly wanted and valued.